Hi, my name is Emily.
Hang on, tilt it more towards you. There you go.
Oh, God. My name is Emily Caruso. And this morning for breakfast, I had 3 quite weird croissants that were really thick and doughy and weren't that great. Lots of fruit that was lovely. Yogurt, some weird little pastis things with cheese and ham and stuff. Yogurt and coffee.
Do you often treat yourself to hotels after having done a sailing trip?
I actually don't. This is really unusual for me. So it's really nice, really nice. And there's air conditioning. Did I mention that?
I'm happy for you. You did mention that. You got it. We got it on mic now, though. Ahoy, shipmates. Welcome back to On the Wind. I'm your host, Andy Schell, coming at you live from the salon on FALKEN in Mindelo, Cape Verde. I got here yesterday. We are setting out. By the time you hear this, actually on Tuesday, February 6th, if you listen to this the day it comes out, we will be just heading to sea for what will be my 8th transatlantic. I'm very excited. The trade winds are blowing. It's beautiful here. The Sahara sands have died down, and I'm really looking forward to this trip. A couple things I want to talk about before we get into this week's episode. First of all, this is the last episode of this podcast season, so we will be back with new On the Wind episodes on March 12th. In the meantime, the Quarterdeck podcast will start up again. So me and August have already recorded some more technical stuff on the Quarterdeck podcast. Those will start dropping next week on Tuesdays during the On the Wind off season. So just a little programming note there. We have added a workshop in Annapolis. We're calling it Offshore Sailing Essentials. It is the weekend of April 19, 20, and 21 in Annapolis. Mia and myself are hosting it. We're hoping to get some special guests there, including Ryan Ellison of Ryan and Sophie Sailing, and probably Sophie, Matt Rutherford, as well as some of our Annapolis friends involved. Basically, it's going to be a 2-day workshop covering the real fundamentals of ocean sailing. So we're going to talk a lot about weather routing and weather forecasting and how to anticipate that to make good decisions at sea. Talk about boat handling offshore, touch on mental prep, outfitting prep, stuff to get ready. The workshop is meant for people that are thinking of going sailing on their own boat or are like imminently doing so, or who have already done so but want to do their next passage in more safety and in more style using the sort of the way of thinking that we've developed here at 59 North. It's $959 per person. That includes Friday night happy hour, all day Saturday, all day Sunday. A couple other perks. If you're already a Quarterdeck member, you get a discount. If you're a past or future crew, you get a discount. And if you're a new customer, you get an extended free trial on the Quarterdeck platform. So check that out at 59-north.com/events. You'll see that on the page there. And we hope to see you in Annapolis. It's limited to 20 people, I should say. So get on there and book quickly. We're trying to keep it to a small group so we can have more back and forth discussion. Last but not least, open bunks at 59-north.com/bunks. Want to highlight, Mia has added a few new women's passages. So we have the women's trip we're doing later this summer, which is already full on FALKEN. Then the first trip of 2025, so that's Portugal to Las Palmas, a trip that we just did 2 weeks ago. That's going to be an all-women's trip with Mia and another co-skipper with her. And then we added our first ever all-women's trip on Eastbjorn, which is going to happen in the summer of 2025. So check out those and all the openings on 59-north.com/bunks. Okay, here comes this week's episode, and I will see you again on the Wind in a few weeks. Until then, hold fast. On the Wind is presented by Pelagic Autopilots, a group of dedicated sailors and engineers developing autopilot solutions for the blue water cruiser, solo sailor, and racer. Pelagic systems have been tested in races and voyages around the globe. In fact, both boats at 59 North use Pelagic Autopilots, and we worked with Pelagic to build a custom unit for FALKEN last year to suit her 30-ton displacement. FALKEN's Pelagic Autopilot served us well for over 16,000 miles during her first offshore season and was one of the first new systems on board that didn't require significant tweaking after our initial sea trial. Pelagic's testing grounds are the Pacific coastal races, and their philosophy is to provide simple, self-contained products requiring no connection to proprietary data networks, one of the biggest advantages to us and the robust, redundant systems that we like to have on board Eastbjorn and FALKEN. The Pelagic Autopilot uses the latest sensor and computer technologies to hold a course through the most difficult conditions. Pelagic Autopilots, built by offshore sailors for offshore sailors. Check out PelagicAutopilot.com to learn more and spec your own system. On the Wind is also presented by Dive Blue, who make portable tankless scuba dive systems. We have one on each of our boats, in fact. Enjoy diving on your own terms with a Blue tankless dive system. What is tankless diving exactly? We like to think of it as innovation. Blue's tankless diving system gives divers an opportunity to experience the beauty of the underwater world without the constant worry of having heavy scuba tanks on hand. They carry two types of tankless dive systems, the Nemo system for tankless diving up to 10 feet, and the Nomad system, which is what we have on Falcon and Eastbjorn, for depths up to 30 feet. For us, it's not just about having fun. It allows us to clean the bottom of the boats, fix a wrapped prop, or otherwise inspect the keel and things that you used to have to do either with heavy scuba equipment or by taking a bunch of free dive breaths. And this is basically now a critical tool on both of our boats in our maintenance toolkit. So anybody that's a sailor, that's doing your own stuff out there, I highly recommend one of these systems. The amount of money we've spent on divers over the years to clean the hull before a big passage would easily pay for a tankless scuba dive system. So check out the Nemo and Nomad dive systems at diveblue.com. That's DIVE BLU and then the number 3.com. Thanks again to Dive Blue for sponsoring the podcast. You're listening to On the Wind, my podcast about offshore sailing. I'm your host, Andy Schell. Emily Caruso has spent 18 years and counting as a professional sailor, though only first learning about the sport in her late 20s. Growing up in the countryside in England, Emily had an epiphany one day during a weekend sailing excursion and hasn't looked back since. I sat down with Emily in person on board FALKEN here in Cape Verde to talk about her career path, what motivates and scares her, leadership, skippering Sir Francis Chichester's legendary GYPSY MOTH IV, working for 59 North, deep feeling, and so much more. This was a really fun episode. Emily is a wonderful speaker and a wonderful person, and I am delighted that she is working for us as one of our skippers. Enjoy. Are you ready to roll?
Yes.
Okay, we're rolling. Okay, Emily. I always ask the guests, particularly when we're in person, to start by just describing the setting. So if you can give our listeners a little insight into where we're recording this right now.
Okay, so we're on São Vicente in the Cape Verde Islands in Mindelo, which is it's a lovely little marina with quite modern kind of sophisticated pontoons, except that they're not piled. So with any swell, it can be quite entertaining. We have slime lines on the bow and 2 stern lines on. It's very sunny. There's quite a few yachts in. I think quite a few people are prepping to go across the Atlantic. And yeah, the sky is blue. It's beautiful. Not
red Saharan sand like it was a few weeks ago, which we'll get to.
No more sand. Thank God. I'm done with cleaning decks.
So this is interesting because I didn't know you and you didn't know us until literally yesterday. Personally, we met for the first time yesterday. But this is cool because, we hired you based on your reputation from other people, and you work for us now. And you kind of agreed to work with us based on other people's recommendations because you didn't really know anything about us or the podcast or any of this.
No, absolutely.
So how did this come together, and how does it? I mean, just maybe describe what you just did for us. You just got off passage from Las Palmas to here.
Yeah. So the sailing community is obviously quite small, and so everyone tends to know everyone. So especially when a very good business is kind of out there, it soon becomes known. And yeah, I jumped on as skipper in Las Palmas. I was sailing with a very good friend of mine, Alex Leline, who I used to sail with him an awful lot, but we haven't sailed together since before COVID, so 4 years. We have a really good chemistry together, so it was wonderful to find that was still the same. And so yeah, we left Las Palmas, 5 days at sea, arrived on Sunday morning at 5 a.m. I had a bit of everything weather-wise. It was my first trip, but not my first time on this hull. I was going to ask you that. You have some, let's put it, interesting history with this boat long before we took over. Tell that story. Yeah, okay. So obviously I'm not going to name her a previous name because that would be terribly bad luck. But many, many moons ago, I first drove this boat, and there was an issue with the rudder being on backwards, which created some entertainment. And then a bit of a gas issue. So it basically lasted less than 24 hours, and then we were kind of on another vessel. So
somehow, I mean, you glazed over the rudder being on backwards. How is that possible? And how did you even get the damn boat out of the dock?
Well, you know what? I think your brain, unless I thought it was feasible, rationally feasible, then you don't assume that something like that could happen. With hindsight, the way that she felt, the pressure on the helm, it was very obvious. But it's not, it shouldn't be possible. And yet it was. There'd been an issue with the quadrant being taken off to straighten it. And during that period, the tide turned, the rudder had dropped slightly, obviously, to enable it to clear the hull and then do a 180-degree flip. And then the quadrant was put back on. That's what it seemed like afterwards anyway. We managed to snap a couple of Dyneema steering cables and then jam the quadrant on the stops because, of course, as soon as we had any speed on, and the helm at the time just took some of the pressure off, of course, she bit. And both helms went flying over, and So
to get technical, what you're talking about here is like you have a balanced spade rudder, which is designed when it's on correctly. If you let go of the wheel, it'll drag straight behind the boat. But also, if you turn it slightly, the way the balanced rudder works, it's almost like power steering. It helps you steer it, and you get the reverse of that when the rudder's on backwards. So the second you let go of the wheel, it just goes wham.
That's entirely what happened. Yeah. It's a great story now, but what I didn't mention was the crew at the time had got wind of the fact that I'm a little superstitious, and I have a particular love of the animal with long ears that we don't mention the name of. And being that we're sat on the boat, I'm not going to mention it by name, but I'm sure we all know. And when I first got on the boat, they'd put together a menu for the week, and every single meal was that particular creature in some different format or recipe. And that's where it began. So,
So that's the superstitions are real. The one I carry with me, like seriously, is the B word. Yeah, you're
those
pointing
yellow
to
ones.
the fruit hammock right now.
There is none. There are no banana. Oh.
It's okay. I think we can say
we
it.
can
as
say
long
it.
as we don't have
I'm pretty
them
sure we
eat
can
it.
say
Yeah.
it.
So, and I've had similar stories of bananas being on board and bad things.
What's your
happening.
understanding of where that derives from?
So the banana story I've heard is like a couple different origins. It's like, okay, they carried spiders that bit people. I've heard that one. They ripen all at the same time and ripen all the rest of the fresh provisions with them because of the gases they emit. Those are the two ones I've heard.
Yeah.
Have you heard anything
I've heard
different?
those two, and they give off gases, don't they, when they start
supposedly, yeah.
breaking
I
down.
haven't heard the animal with the long ears that won't be named. I don't know that
they
one.
used to keep them for food on, in days of old.
Yeah.
And of course, that particular creature will gnaw through everything, including, wooden hulls and yeah, right. So
that makes sense. That's a new one to me.
And there's certain parts of the world where they're very bad luck because of quarries collapsing as well. So that particular animal,
interesting.
Yeah.
So, tell me the gas story. You told me this yesterday. This is almost scarier, but also almost a better story.
Well,
same trip.
The gas story was I had two Korean crew. I was really excited because they were making Korean fried rice at the time, and I was sat in the aft nav station with a crew member helping them fill out the logbook. And then it was dark, and we were partially down the Needles Channel on the south coast of the UK by the Isle of Wight. And suddenly there was a big flash and a bang, which every skipper's nightmare, the whole sick feeling in the stomach. And I came rushing out, and the oven door had blown open. And I think what I think happened was they were leaning on, I think, the particular, knob that operated the gas for the oven section. And I think they filled it up with gas, and then somehow a spark I don't know. That's my... obviously, when that happened, everything was turned off, ventilated. We returned to port, and we had the experts come in and assess the boat because we don't mess with gas. But
yeah. So you had some pretty bad juju on this boat in the past. So how did you feel coming back here. What was that like?
Well, that was my only experience of this
Yeah.
boat. One day that all happened. And so I was kind of a bit like, oh, please, can we just get along? And it was a wonderful trip, and she didn't let us down. So I think we're friends again.
Good. I'm happy to hear that. Do you feel like the different boats you sail, do you like ascribe characters to them and personalities? How do you are boats a living thing
Yeah,
to you?
absolutely.
How do you think about
Absolutely.
that?
You can feel the soul of the boat, and that sounds so kind of cheesy, but you can. I was very lucky. I used to have the opportunity to skip a GYPSY Moth IV, which was Sir Francis Chichester's iconic round the world yacht. And she had some very strange things that would happen when you're on board. Things you'd see out the corner of your eye, lockers that would strangely open themselves. There's stories from other skippers of just glancing up at anchor, glancing up into the cockpit and seeing sort of a shadow move across the cockpit, that kind of thing. And you can feel that she did something. You can feel that she did something remarkable. There's something very kind of special about her. Very special. I was really quite attached to her. So
Would you say that's is that the most soulful boat you've sailed?
In one
the
way,
one you felt
yes.
most connected to. What is a boat you felt most connected to?
In one way, it would be her, but equally, I do some work with the Ellen MacArthur Cancer Trust with young people in recovery from cancer, and one of their original boats was called Moonspray, GYPSY 46, I think it was. And she was like, you could feel the amount of happiness and laughter and remarkable work and love that had taken place on her. You could just feel the kids, the young people sort of emanating from the hull.
Are those feelings personal to you, or do other skippers share that?
I think from the conversations we've had, that other skippers share the same in different boats in different ways, just the fact that I've just told you a story about my history with this boat, and now we've come back together. There's a relationship, you have a relationship. It's, yeah.
I mean, we were touching on this a little bit at dinner last night, but you can take this further, and we probably will, but how you're not just connected with the boat, but when you actually go to sea, you have this other connection with the rest of the crew and with the stars and the waves and the whales and all the rest of that stuff. And I happen to believe in that, whether you think it's hocus pocus or not. It's a real, whatever's causing it, it's a real feeling if you're conscious of it. And I think that's so cool.
And to give you, I think, the example we talked about, when I think the first time that you steer to a star, and then over a certain period, you look at the compass, you realize you've got to correct, because of course the star has moved, except it hasn't. You have. And then there's that sudden sense of being on a moving planet, and then feeling a part of that in a way that changes the way you think forever. Nothing's the same again. I honestly think that.
Do you remember the first time you experienced that?
Yeah, absolutely.
Want to tell the story?
Well, that was exactly what happened. I mean, it was my first... Gosh, it was it would have been a delivery that I did as a crew member across the Med. And so many, it's such a delight when those things are real for the first time. The first time you see dolphins in bioluminescence or phosphorescence, whatever.
That to me remains the most magical thing about ocean sailing. It feels impossible until you see it. And it's just like, oh my gosh.
Yeah. And disco jellies, when the jellies hit the hull, and then they create this river of kind of like glowing.
We call the bioluminescent dolphins, we call them electric dolphins.
That's perfect. Because that's exactly what they look like.
Yeah.
So those things, and all of that happened on that first trip, actually.
Wow.
So, yeah. Yeah.
How long have you been a professional sailor?
So we're coming up to 18 years in, I think, March.
Did you always know that's what you wanted?
Well, interestingly, I had a normal life, kind of relatively normal.
I was going to say, how do you define normal?
What is normal? It's all relative. Well, I did the whole, where I live, where I'm from, in Somerset in the southwest of England. It's home to the head office of Clark's Shoes. So, one of the biggest kind of footwear retailers and manufacturers in the world, I think. And so everybody from where I live pretty much works or did work at Clark's. And so I followed that route and kind of was very much a local girl. And then life changed for me. The job was actually made up. Well, I was exposed to a weekend sailing on the Solent, and it was like an epiphany. This is in my late 20s. It was like an epiphany. It was like there was a moment that, you know, it was life-changing when I thought, this is where I'm supposed to be. And so I did some courses.
So you never sailed as a kid, or?
I did jump on and off of boats as a kid. Yeah, we had a kind of boat in the family, but I was that kid with the life jacket and the fishing net. You know, I didn't learn to sail. I was too young, but I've run around with that little fishing net in the marina, and I was scared of the dredger. You know, like I actually fell in between the pontoon and the boat when I was very small, and I was pulled out by my wrists, and apparently said, "You can't talk down there," which apparently is very amusing for those that know me.
I mean, I only met you yesterday, but I already know what you mean.
Okay. Yeah. So then that's kind of inspired me that weekend.
What was the context of the weekend? Like, how did that?
Okay, that
come
was
together?
weird. So I have some friends that their dad had signed up to do a race but couldn't do it, and so rather than getting a refund, he negotiated a weekend on a boat in the Solent. And this is really strange because I was supposed to be going that weekend. I was supposed to be going to Bristol for a hen do. Dressed as a schoolgirl, which is not really my thing. And then at the very last minute, these friends that were going sailing, 2 people dropped out at the very last minute. And so my boyfriend at the time and myself got a phone call, and they invited us. And so I kind of dropped the hen party. That wasn't much of a toss up for me. It's like, oh, you know, dressed as a schoolgirl out in Bristol, or go sailing. It's like, okay, let's go sailing. So, and that was it. That was the start of the...
And what was it specifically? I always try to drill down on this with people. Like, what was it? 2 questions. What was it specifically that was that epiphany? Can you put your finger on it?
I can remember holding the helm, looking up at the main. I did not know what I was looking at in terms of trim, but I felt like I had some level of control. I can't explain it more than that. And that was the moment. I knew that I was supposed to be there.
But like, how do you take that? It's one thing to have those moments, and it's another thing to act on those moments. So what do you do with that? What did you do with that?
I think I'm a really big believer that there are signposts in life. And I think that, oh God, it sounds a bit far out, but I think the universe gives you little ideas, and then it's your job to act on them. And then if you act on them, you'll get the just rewards. I really believe that.
So how did you act? Like, what do you like? How did you even know what to do? So okay,
Yeah.
so that's great. So and how much time passed between you had that? Because like I imagine like things like that sort of you risk them wearing off and you thinking, oh, that was just a thing. So how did you maintain that feeling long enough to actually act on it?
I literally got home and started researching what courses to do, and I booked a classroom, day skipper theory, in Southampton. I had a very kind of posh guy called Henry, who was the instructor such a long time ago. I remember him. I remember him saying about anchors, you can't beat a Danforth in sand. I remember that so much. Such a funny thing to remember. And I remember being on that particular theory course, and by the time I left, I'd booked the practical. Before I'd even left the classroom, I'd booked the practical. And then I took the practical. And then the story gets a bit more interesting. So then I decided, I know what I'll do. I'll buy a boat with my brother. So we kind of, he'd done a little bit. He was a bit more kind of practically able than I was, because I was been much younger when we'd had that sort of family experience. And we bought a little Jaguar 25, a little bilge keeler.
And such a British boat, the bilge keeler.
Yeah. Well,
can you just describe that for people that don't know what that is?
Okay. Well, I'm not entirely sure that's the right term, but it's a little twin keel, basically. Yeah. And yeah.
So it's got like instead of a keel in the center, it's got one either side, sort of at an angle, so that you can actually let the boat dry out, and it just sits there on the keels.
Yeah. So where we had sailed as children, I guess, or been on boats as children, it had always been in or around the Poole Harbour area, which dries. It's very tidal. And so that particular vessel is quite appropriate for that kind of cruising ground. And I remember going to look at a boat down in Wareham in Dorset. I was on my own. I had no clue, not a clue what I was looking for. I just didn't know, but I did it anyway. And I remember being on a Snapdragon, looking at a Snapdragon, and there was another chap there. And he was really kind to me and was basically pointing out all the bits of the boat that meant it wouldn't be a good buy. This was, and we ended up getting chatting. And I went to his boat and we had actually I think it was an aquavit, just had a little aquavit together and a chat. And he turned out to be like a really nice chap. And I was just talking to him and explaining the difficulty in trying to either get the boat or the mooring first. So the moorings that were affordable to us had 6-year waiting lists on them.
Whew.
That was the only possible mooring that we could possibly afford. They were in the river, Frome, and and they were run or they were managed by the Environment Agency. And so I'm sitting there going, I don't know, well, until we get a mooring, I don't suppose we should really get a boat. But then how do you work it with the depth, etc. And then this chap just said, I work for the Environment Agency. I'll sort you out.
Wow.
And that's what I mean about the universe. You know, you take that risk, you push it, and then.
So I agree with you, first of all, on that universe thing. But I have like a slightly less woo-woo take on it.
Yeah.
That I just think, or like you can think about however you want. But I think that it's also about, if you want to be less woo-woo, it's like you need to be sort of open-minded enough to recognize opportunities when they come along, and then brave enough to act on them, and brave enough and flexible enough in your outlook to act on them and see where they go. Because if you never see them if you're so closed-minded you never see them, well then you never see them. And then if you're also not brave enough to act on them, you'll never know what could have been, so to speak.
Absolutely.
That's really interesting.
There's another thing around that as well. Someone just recently said to me about just ask people, like ask the question. You know what I mean? Because if you don't say it, you won't get it.
It's the concept of it's called going. I heard this somewhere else. Going positive and going first.
Yeah.
So like instead of somebody I mean, I did this. I told you about the new friends I made at the gym last. Like it's like, hey, I got this. Like, just do you want to be friends? Like, let's be friends. Like that kind of. It's sort of awkward and uncomfortable, but at the same time, it makes things. It's like how things happen.
Absolutely. If you don't do anything, nothing's going to happen.
Well, that's because my point was going to be, you also the really woo-woo side of this is like the whole manifest your destiny or whatever. Well, sitting around thinking about it's not going to manifest jack diddly.
Yeah.
Like you actually have to take some action at some point. You can't just think and things aren't just going to magically fall in your lap. You have to have it has to be combined with action. I actually think we're getting a little bit off topic, but this is fun. I think my hunch is that most people don't actually know what they want.
Yeah, I agree.
And they either don't know what they want or they do know, but they're afraid to ask for it or to find it.
Yeah.
I say that in the context of like a lot of people email me about like, hey, I really like what you did starting up the business. Do you have any advice for me? And it's like, my general response is, if you really know what you want, you don't need my advice.
Yeah.
You'll figure it out. And if you, and like that's all that it takes is, and you can't, we were talking about this last night. It's hard to get motivated to do something that you don't really want to do. You and I share that, I think.
Yeah,
a lot.
definitely. Yeah.
So, but once you find that thing that you want, then there's no like you can't help it. You can't help it.
Yeah, and you're driven to it. You're like you're driven. Yeah, absolutely.
So back to your story.
Yeah.
Did this whole the courses, all this stuff? Did you know you wanted to do this for a living, or was this just like, this is a new hobby I like? And
I wanted, I mean, I remember getting my yacht master and thinking that was like offshore, and then thinking, gosh, that's it. I've done it. That's it. That's the end.
Top of the mountain.
The top of the mountain. There it is. And then, the redundancy of my job was 3 months after I got my yacht master offshore. And so here we are again in a position where because it was a redundancy in the UK and I was working for a company that really looked after their employees, I was given a reasonable kind of amount of money, which was a buffer for me.
A severance.
Yeah, so it was a buffer. I would not have been able to make the transition to a freelance, self-employed sailor without a little bit of money behind me, because I wouldn't have been able to pay my mortgage. You see what I mean?
Yep.
So that happened. That was so timely again. So I kind of thought, well, I've got this opportunity, so let's try and see what I can do with this sailing thing. And the one person that I knew who I'd met on that weekend, funnily enough, in the Solent, who was the mate on the boat, introduced me to Clipper, the around the world yacht race. And so I ended up going on as a first mate actually, on a corporate weekend for them, which I didn't realise I was sort of jumping in sort of somewhere near, not really where perhaps most people start. It was like the bigger boats, and I didn't know what a running backstay was.
Clipper even now is sort of like, that's sort of like the top of the mountain. If you want to be an offshore skipper, it's sort of like us and Clipper, and slightly different. And there's not that many other opportunities, even on like private yachts, because the private yachts don't do a ton of sailing. If you actually want to sail a lot, Clipper's kind of it.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah. So I didn't know what I didn't know. So
well, how much? I mean, so you talk about, because you also, all this woo woo, manifestations that we talk about, luck plays a part of it, right? And like, how much of it do you think is like, you were like the time and place where you were? Like, south coast of England is like the epicenter of this type of sailing, and you just happen to be from there and be just amongst that group of people.
Well, not really, because I live in Somerset, which is, farming country.
Okay, so I don't know my geography.
And it's okay, don't worry. There is a coastline in Somerset, but it's the Bristol Channel, which is, second biggest tidal range in the world after Bay of Fundy.
Yeah.
And it's not the best place.
So it's not such a part of the culture there.
No,
as
not
it
in the
is
slightest.
In, say, Portsmouth.
And I only knew the one person in the sailing industry, and I met him on that weekend when friends who aren't sailors just happened to have this charter. So yeah, I didn't know anyone.
Interesting.
It was really very new.
So you still had to, despite, it wasn't far for you, I guess, to go to the south coast, but you knew, did you know that that's like where you should go?
I think I can't. I wanted to go sailing. I knew that. I wanted to do some, proper training, some courses. So I did that. And then that led me to meeting people through the training. I guess that's how it happened.
Yeah.
So, and then from there, it was just kind of pushing it out there and saying, where can I go and work? And asking the one person in the industry that I really knew. And he gave me an intro, and then through that intro, I met lots more people. And then I went on as mate a lot. And what I think I learned was I worked with lots of different skippers and saw how they taught and how they led and how they ran boats. And I think I picked up from different skippers, and then eventually started teaching. I got my cruising instructor and then my yacht master instructor. Started teaching on, I would say smaller yachts, but I guess that's, normal kind of, 40-footers or whatever.
Yeah. Sort of mid-range cruising boats.
So then then the hard bit came, with the bit that I'd managed to avoid until then, which is parking. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah. That is indeed the hard bit that you don't often get.
And then, and I remember actually working with the United Kingdom Sailing Academy, and a very inspiring person there basically said to me, it doesn't matter if you crash the boat, you have to crash the boat to learn. It's fine. And gave me the confidence to teach parking. And then you teach best what you most need to learn. And so then I was able to kind of do that side and teach and instruct and that kind of thing. And then eventually started driving the big boats, and some other stuff, like going further afield. Got into expedition sailing, which I really, really love. I'm not a racer.
Define that.
Anything where you don't necessarily know what's going to happen at the other end. That's how I'd say it. It's all kind of new, and you have to figure things out, work your way around things. And we were saying the other day about when you arrive in an anchorage in the middle of the night, and then you wake up in the morning and you kind of see where you are.
Well, you have this impression of what you think it's going to look like when you get there, looking at the chart and whatever, and then you wake up and it's usually not what you thought.
Yeah, in one way or another. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So I love that the sense of the unknown and dealing with things. I like challenges.
How have you managed to maintain your passion when it's also a job?
So I keep it varied. That's what I do. So I couldn't work with one concept full time. I just couldn't, because I would end up, I want to keep loving it. I want to keep loving everything that I do. And keeping it varied as well gives you the freedom to let go of certain jobs when you know they're not right for you. It's not about money ever. So if you figure out that something's not working for you, if you have a number of other things that you can do, then you have the freedom to let it go and still pay the mortgage.
It also can't be about money in our industry unless you're doing the super yacht thing. There isn't very much money
exactly.
in it. You're not doing this for the money at all. Not even me on the business owner level. Like, it's not what we're doing this for.
It's definitely
we wanted
not.
to make money, we'd go do something else entirely.
I agree completely. But I still have to pay the bills though. So,
exactly,
yeah, absolutely.
How do you so are you like, what do you do for hobbies? When you're not
what
sailing?
are those?
What are those? Like, could you be a cruising sailor? Do you have a desire to go on your own boat and do stuff on your own boat?
One day maybe, but not, in a long time in the future when there's not much else to do, I can see myself jumping on my own boat, maybe doing a cruise around the world, and try not to be one of those, the people that get stuck. Those, maybe, yeah. But at the moment, I feel like I'm like really lucky. I get to work on some amazing boats with some amazing people, doing some amazing trips. And then in between, I've got my own little cottage in Somerset, my safe place that I get to go home to, which is really important to sustain this life.
Why?
I think to do this long term, you have to have some foundation. Otherwise, it can be quite hard. Well, it's challenging mentally anyway, but without foundation to go home to, I think it makes it more so.
What do you get? What do you get when you go home? How does that manifest itself when you go home? What are you trying to gain from that?
So, okay, right. So before I leave, I clean my house completely, change all the bedding. So it's perfect when I walk through the door. Then I'll chuck my bag down, take my shoes off, and just go up the stairs and feel the carpet. Because somehow carpet's really special when you've been working on boats and been to sea. You know what I mean?
Uh-huh.
Flush the toilet a few times,
Turn the tap on, let it run.
Yeah. Boil the kettle. I don't know. There's something so satisfying about nothing. Doing nothing or feeling nothing, just quiet. It's like your brain has to work at such a pace doing this job. Our situational awareness has to be so astute, so on it.
Like literally even when you're asleep.
Yeah. Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
Like when you're sleeping, the tiniest kind of change in noise.
Yep.
It can be the noisiest thing sailing, and sleeping, but it's a specific noise that you're used to. One change in that noise and you're awake in an instant.
Yeah.
And that kind of pressure all the time, which don't get me wrong, I love it. But you can't sustain it for too long. You have to then walk away and go and decompress and relax for a bit. Otherwise, you'd just be so wired.
We talk a lot about, me and Nikki share these conversations about the sort of burden of responsibility.
Yeah.
And that when you're not on the boat, if you're like, for me anyway, if I'm like amongst friends, we're natural leaders, right? So people are often, friends and family often look to me anyway, I don't want to speak for you, to be like, hey, what are we doing? It's like, you tell me.
I don't want to make a decision.
Yeah.
I totally agree. I absolutely agree.
For me, it's like I have to fight the instinct to immediately answer that because I'm used to that.
Uh-huh.
And I'm still struggling learning that I need to say no.
Yeah, I agree. You want to be, it's funny. Yeah. You want to be in a position where, you're taking command, or just someone else do it, just for 5 minutes, someone else have the responsibility or I agree.
Do you ever miss the corporate life for Clark Shoes? That was easy.
Easy question. Yeah.
How do you maintain friends and family and relationships?
Well, my friends, I have two very different sets of friends. I have friends at home that are really good friends, and then I have really good sailing friends, and I need both. For the same reason, I need my sailing friends to talk about the sailing. I can't do that so much at home because it's such a kind of niche concept. I always say you've got 3 minutes with the non-sailing community. You've got 3 minutes.
Let's go deeper on that. I love that. I agree 100% with you. We talked about this on the Greenland trip, but what are you talking about?
Okay, so, and I say this to the crew when they've come, because this kind of trip, this experience is life-changing for so many people. You really touch something in them. They really are moved by it. And so I say to them, and they're like, oh, I can't wait to go home and tell everyone. And, it's going to be, and I say to them, look, I'm going to be honest with you. You have 3 minutes with them and they will be engaged for 3 minutes and then they will glaze and they'll be putting their pajamas on and that kind of thing. But unless you understand, then you don't understand. You know what I mean?
100%. It's the, I joked on our Greenland trip. I said to the crew, like, we're going to have to keep in touch with each other as like our own support group because it's not their fault, but your friends and family back home, they just don't care.
Yeah.
They don't, because everybody's got their own things that are more important to care about.
Yeah,
their lives
absolutely.
to care about, and they just don't care that much.
Yeah.
And that can be like jarring, I think, sometimes when you're like so excited and you don't understand why people don't necessarily share that. Except I will say you get the occasional person that actually is touched and that's inspired by, and then they go and pursue whatever. It's kind of like you having that weekend experience. Whatever you can find those people and then boom. But for the most part,
I agree.
It's short lived.
How do you empathize with something that you have no concept of? How do you do that?
I mean, what we're talking about really is the tame version of anybody going off and doing I think like the military aspect of that is probably the most extreme. These actual life or death experiences and coming back from that and not having any outlet for it.
Yeah.
And what we're talking about it recreationally, but it's on that same spectrum.
Yeah. It's interesting how many ex-forces people actually get into the sailing world. How many people, and that camaraderie and that kind of
the community,
the community,
the depth of understanding in the short amount of time that you are with people, the reliance on one another, that
and the
sort
discipline
of thing.
to
you don't
degree.
have that in daily life.
No.
And that's also what separates the type of sailing we're talking about, these offshore passages, from cruising or anything else, because it's like I think the type of sailing you've done with Clipper and that we do and all this sort of expedition type stuff is farther removed. Like it's closer to like a mountaineering expedition than a typical Caribbean bareboat charter or even a skipper charter. They're almost two different.
Absolutely, they are different. That's the other interesting thing about the sailing world. There's so many different facets, and you're quite right to highlight this particular, facet or avenue, if you like. And it covers everything. We encompass everything, every kind of concept. It's not just the sailing; it's the people management. It's the navigation. It's the dealing with when they go wrong without a huge support network. Out there on your own. There are so many angles to it. Even just this particular part of the industry.
Is this you do a lot of different things. What is your favorite thing? The offshore stuff.
Offshore. Well, I say offshore.
Yeah.
It doesn't necessarily mean offshore. I mean cruising in parts of the world that are less traveled. Yeah, less traveled.
What is it about it that you like? You touched on this a little bit, but is it the technical act of sailing the boat? Is it the seeing new places? Is it the crew? Is there one thing that stands out to you as like, this is the number one reason I do this? I
like seeing a team come together. I really do. I love the best of human beings. We're too often, especially in the modern world, we're exposed to the worst. And with this concept, most people are like-minded that sign up, and getting people to inspire a team to understand that the bigger picture is more important than any individual need. That's what makes a functional team. That's what makes a successful team in my mind. And to watch that happen and to be a party to that, or to assist in that is wonderful. And there's nothing better than the smile, when the helm smile, or like knowing that you've helped to inspire people or given them a gift of something that they didn't even know. It's hard to explain, but just changing people's lives, because we get that opportunity. I mean, how lucky are we? We get to change people's lives doing what we love.
That's it. That's
how
the
lucky
reason
are
we do it. What would you do if you couldn't do this?
I'd find a way. I like writing, actually. I love to write. That's my creative outlet. If I couldn't do it, it depends why I couldn't do it. I'd find a way around something.
You strike me as a very confident person. Is that true?
I think in some areas, but in other areas, not in the slightest. You know, I think I think confidence is something you build. And I certainly have built my confidence over the last 18 years. But I think if I'm completely honest, there are still areas where I struggle, as we all do. I think the important thing is that we can be honest about that and open about it, so we can allow that of each other. I'm not entirely sure there's anyone out there that's like 100% confident in every aspect of their life.
Well, I think there probably is, but they also make lousy leaders because they're usually not very empathetic. Because if you don't have that, if you have full confidence, then you kind of have no empathy, I think. I was going to ask you this before, like all the training and stuff that you do to get to this point, not a lot of it is specifically leadership based. So you mentioned you worked with a bunch of different skippers. Like you kind of have to learn, you kind of have to pay enough attention to learn what's right and wrong.
Yeah.
How did you get that?
Okay.
How did you develop your own leadership style, I guess?
So I think at first it was very much organic. So you feel it, and you feel what works with the team and what works with people. Over the last 6 years, I've been assisting in or co-facilitating an MCA course called The Human Element of Leadership and Management, which is now necessary for master officer of the watch tickets, master's tickets with the MCA. And they've introduced this concept because they recognise that 80% of accidents and incidents in the maritime sector are based on human error, and to promote a just and fair culture on board ships and corporate and individual accountability. And this is new for us. Aviation have been doing it like 30 years longer. And maritime are behind. And that includes...
That's ironic because all these traditions started in maritime, flipped over to aviation, who took it more seriously and then elevated it, and now it's flipping back to the maritime. Yeah,
well, the aviation in the I think it's late 70s or early 80s, there was a big air disaster in Tenerife where two passenger airliners collided on the runway, and like over 500 people were lost.
Wow.
And the studies of the black box, etc., suggested that a lot of it was down to the pilot taking the decision himself, not being able to take any kind of advice from the rest of the bridge team, if you like, the cockpit team. Cockpit, not bridge. And a lot of ego. And so that's when they went, hang on, we've got to change something here. We need to and they introduced cockpit resource management, which is still widely taught today, and human factors. But yeah, it's taken about 30 years for us to catch up in the maritime sector. But I've co-delivered that course with a leadership expert, if you like, or leadership consultant. And I'm now working with another one. And so I've kind of learnt certain skills, certain models, certain concepts, I guess theoretical ones, that I can help to apply in the practical sense, and that's really helped as well. So, but I think most leadership is about, actually a lot of it, I think, is about holding a mirror up to yourself and being really honest about how you can do better. I think that's the key with leadership is holding the mirror up and being really honest with yourself about what you can do better. That's what I would say.
How do you then take that? Because I always try to say, okay, we're applying this in a professional setting, but so much of it also applies to, the guys on the X yacht next to us who have their two kids on board, him and his wife and a crew member, and they're sailing to Barbados on Sunday.
Of course.
How do you where do you draw the line between what's sort of like necessary professionally to meet certain standards versus what is applicable to the average cruising sailor?
I think it's all applicable. It's, it's just conceptual at the end of the day, and you just flex it and adapt it based on the circumstance, It's if you're leading the boat, then it doesn't matter if it's family or if it's 10 paying crew, it's the same concept. It's about getting the best out of looking at, first of all, their welfare, which means looking after them and the boat and running the boat efficiently, so it's the same thing.
What do you think? Are there can you distill that down into like a couple priorities?
Well, first of all, yeah, I can. Okay, so develop people. If you want to get people to buy, a successful team will all be completely bought into the same concept, right? That means communication, good communication to make sure everyone's always in the loop. And then about motivating people. Like there's in any leadership concept, there are two kinds of people, let's say. There are those that will and those that can. So if you've got someone that will and that can, that's brilliant. But you need to keep them motivated, because if they get bored, they will start to kind of go wrong. If you get someone that will but can't, you need to train them and teach them the skills. If you get somebody that that can but won't, you need to motivate them. Figure out how to motivate them. And if they can't and won't, then you have to ask why they're
there. Yeah.
And where did they start? Because if when they first arrived, if they were there with the will, you can't necessarily just go, right, you're off now, because who went wrong? Where did it go wrong? Somehow, as a leader.
Are you missing one in there of the person that can and will but won't listen?
Well, why won't they listen? That's the question.
But they can and they will, but they think they know better. Like that type of person that comes with...
That's management. Yeah, that's about one...
Because I think they're the hardest.
Yeah, can and will, but they know better. Yeah. I mean, well then, what do they think they know better? Let's explore that.
And why?
Yeah, let's explore what they think they know better. Pull it apart. And if maybe they do.
Yeah. That's a really good point.
Yeah?
And that's where the listening stuff comes in.
Yeah.
I love this stuff. We could talk about this forever. What is the thing that you are most interested in teaching? Do you like that aspect the most?
Yeah, I love some of the understanding that I've gained over the last 6 years mostly with this course. I love the concepts of that. I love talking about, say, motivation, for example. What motivates people? Now, most people their first reaction will be money. Money does not motivate people. Money, so you know Maslow's hierarchy of needs and what kind of motivates our behavior based on our needs. Well, he had a student called Hertzberg who basically challenged Maslow and said, no, actually, money, or there's a certain degree, a point on the ladder, if you like, which is now expected in the Western world, the developed nations. That point is expected, and that includes money. It includes your environment that you work in. All the survival stuff is a given. You know, we always have food and water.
We're beyond that,
exactly.
As a culture, as a society.
So his argument was that no longer motivates us because it's expected. Right. It's already there.
Yeah.
It will demotivate us if it's not there, but it won't motivate us. And instead, it's those bits at the point of Maslow's hierarchy that motivate, which is the self-esteem, which is the actualization or the enlightenment, depending on how you look at it. It's those aspects that motivate people. So that's really interesting, and that's around developing people.
What motivates you?
I think feeling part of something. That's what feeling a part of something. And I don't think I'm unusual in that. And I don't think I'm unusual in that in the kind of people that come on these trips. I think that's why it's special and it changes lives, because for a lot of people, they go away having felt like they've been really part of something. They've worked closely in challenging situations. Do you have an example that you can tell where you really emphasize that, where you were like, what trip, what experience like most represented why you do what you do? Specifically. Actually, I'm going to take this away from sailing, if that's all right, and go back many years ago. So when I was at Clark's, I can remember one of my bosses at the time was quite forward thinking in this sense of, he sent a number of his kind of sort of senior-ish people in the office on a management training program, but with a difference. So we worked with a local children's charity, and we were all sent to a camp in the Mendip Hills in near where I live, and we worked with disadvantaged young people, so like around the age of like between 10 and 12, that kind of age group, disadvantaged kids that had a really rough time, lived in some pretty tricky circumstances and that kind of thing. And he took a team that was probably not the most functional team at the time. And we had to run a countryside holiday for these kids. We had to plan everything through. We had to deliver all these different concepts, look after them. Obviously, we had teachers there as well, you know. And I can remember that changed my life. It changed my life, that experience. And I came away, it really impacted me emotionally, because making them happy just for 2 days, giving back to them just for 2 days, was way more important than any of us individually. And that's what made us work together as a team. That's what I think I look to now, or I think is important to try and emulate, if you know what I mean. Mm-hmm. So that's what I would say, my example of that understanding.
How do you keep things fresh, and how do you keep yourself challenged and not bored?
Just keep it varied. Yeah. Also, I think it's important to go, like, I'm happy to go on as mate as well for other skippers. Maybe as long as I know they're kind of good, you know what I mean? Only in a sense of, like, you know, self-preservation. But I'm happy to do that, because otherwise, because that's going to help me to evolve and continue to grow, to look at how other people do things. And certainly from some of the technical aspects, I know there are things I'm weak on, you know, I know there are. And so if I can kind of face that and then work with people that perhaps are better in those areas.
Do you have an example of something you want to get better at?
I think the electronics is definitely, you know, like, I'm curious, but my brain works in a certain way. I have to really work to understand those things. You know, it's much easier for some people, and perhaps those people may struggle more on the people side or whatever. You know what I mean? I'm more inclined towards the people side and the sailing aspect of the boat than I am the engineering, the tech, the electronics. That's my sort of weaker area. But what I tend to do is try and work with people that have those skills. Which is what you do. You know, a smart leader will do that, right? If you can't do everything.
That's right.
So you surround yourself, and surrounding yourself with your opposite characters is important as well. Like, the biggest mistake is to surround yourself with people that are just like yourself, because, you know, then you aren't a balanced, you know, team or concept.
Is there a place, a boat, a job, something that you have your sights set on that's the next thing I want? Like how do you set goals for yourself, and what are any of those specifically? It's
largely about places, I think, now that I would like to sail to or around. I think I'd like to, like, Galapagos is on the list, if you know what I mean. Those kind of places. Those key. I have no interest in doing something like Cape Horn. That's not for me. But places of, you know, I mean, the whole concept of Darwin and, you know, the theory of evolution, all that kind of thing, and the wildlife. And so somewhere like Galapagos, remote places that no one else goes to. You know, I was fortunate last year to visit Kiribati, the Republic of Kiribati in the Pacific, and visit Christmas Island. And that was life-changing, you know. Like, they hadn't seen anyone for 3 years.
They hadn't seen anyone?
No, they were because of COVID.
Oh, right.
Oh, yeah, their borders were shut. No flights in or out.
Wow.
So we were the third yacht in. And there were kids there of a certain age that hadn't seen white people before.
Wow.
Now, think about that. Like, nowadays.
Yeah.
You know,
it's impossible. It feels impossible.
How incredible is it to be the first white person someone's seen? Like, probably terrifying, because from the way we looked as well when we turned up, having been at sea. So that was remarkable, you know, just trying to understand those people and what their life must be like, or seeing what their life is like, you know. Very happy, beautiful, caring, lovely, kind, generous people, you know, very warm and inviting, and, you know, and you kind of go, maybe we're getting it wrong, you know. Maybe the rest of us are getting it wrong somehow. Anyway.
I'm going to wrap this up. We've been doing this almost an hour. I always like to end it. It goes quick, doesn't it? I always like to end this by sort of asking 2 questions. One, is there anything I haven't asked you that you're just dying to tell me? Not
particularly. I feel like, you know what I'm like. I'll tell you.
And anything you want to recommend?
Anything I want to recommend? No, just keep doing what you're doing, because I'm loving the concept. I'm loving 59 North. I think the culture, the vibe is just exactly, it's right up my street. So
cool.
Yeah, I'm really, really grateful to be here.
What's the next trip you're sailing with us for?
I'm working with Chris Kobush on, I'm doing Antigua, Jamaica, and then Jamaica, Cuba.
Have you been to Cuba?
I haven't.
That's gonna be you'll enjoy.
I haven't been to Jamaica either.
Yeah, that's new for us too. I'm gonna miss that one obviously, but Jamaica's a new destination. We were in Cuba in 2017.
Yeah,
the first time, and it was fantastic.
So again, the new places.
Yeah.
So really excited about that.
Cool. Well, I'm very excited that you're on the team. Thanks for doing the interview. It's been great to get to know you in the last 24 hours. Cool. Thanks, Emily.
No worries.
Thanks again to Pelagic Autopilots for sponsoring this episode of the show. To spec your own system and learn more about their independent, robust, and redundant autopilots, go to pelagicautopilots.com. Thanks again to Dive Blue for presenting this episode of the podcast. Go to diveblue.com, that's DIVEBLU and the number 3, to check out the Nemo and Nomad tankless dive systems and never hold your breath to fix a wrapped prop again. On the Wind is the podcast about sailing, created by 59 Degrees North and hosted by me, Andy Schell, and also by August Sandberg, Emma Garshagen, and occasionally Ben Doer. The show is mixed and produced in Frederick, Maryland by Lee Cumberland. Ads are read by us, the hosts, and occasionally by 59 North's bosun Adam Brown and podcast producer Lee Cumberland. Episode artwork and website show notes are done by Laura Parent in San Francisco. The intro theme music is composed and performed by former podcast guest and musician Cameron Dale, while the outro music you're hearing now is, of course, by our friends, the Stormweather Shanty Choir. We love hearing from our fans, so send your questions and comments to holdfast@59-north.com, and please do us a favor and review the show on iTunes or wherever else you get your podcasts. Until next time, hold fast.
I made up me mind that I was inclined to go to sea no more. No more, no more, to go to sea no more. I made up me mind that I was inclined to go to sea no more. As I was walking down the street, I met sweet Angeline. She said, come home with me, me lad, and we'll have a cracking time. But when I awoke, it was no joke. I found I was all alone. My silver watch and my money too, and my whole bloody gear was gone. Was gone, was gone. My whole bloody gear was gone. It was when I awoke, it was no joke, for my whole bloody gear was gone. As I was walking down the street, I met Big Rapper Brown. I asked him if he would take me in, and he looked at me with a frown. He said, last time you was paid up with me, you took up no score. But I'll take your advance and I'll give you a chance to go to sea once more. Once more, once more, to go to sea once more. I'll take your advance and I'll give you a chance to go to sea once more. Sometimes we're catching whales, me lads, but mostly we get none. With a 20-foot oar in every paw from 5 o'clock in the morn. And when daylight's gone and the night's coming on, we rest upon our oars. And oh boys, you wish that you was dead, or snug with the girls ashore. Ashore, ashore, or snug with the girls ashore. Oh boys, you wish that you was dead, or snug with the girls ashore. Come all you seafaring lads that listen to me song. When you go a big boating, boys, make sure you do not go wrong. You take my tip when you come off a trip, don't go with any horse, but get married instead and have all night in bed and go to sea no more. No more, no more, to go to sea no more. Get married instead and have all night in bed and go to sea no more. No more, no more, to go to sea no more. Get married instead and have all night in bed and go to sea no more.